What kind of woman walks 3 weeks across open country just to stand at a stranger's fence and ask for water? That was the first question burning in Quentin Granger's mind the day he saw her dragging a torn carpet bag through the red dirt of his ranch in Wyoming Territory. The wind came sharp off the Bighorn Mountains. Dust rolled across the fence line as Quentin sat high in the saddle, reins tight in one hand. He had seen drifters before, broken men, starving boys, folks with eyes full of begging. But she was none of those. "I ain't hiring," he called. "And I don't need another mouth to feed." The woman stopped and lifted her head. Her bonnet was dusty, her dress torn at the hem, but her eyes were dark and steady. "I'm not asking for work," she said. "I'm asking for water." Quentin stared. He expected fear or pleading. He got neither. She stood thin and worn, but solid as a fence post planted deep. He sighed and swung down from his horse. "Come on, then." She followed him to the well house. When she drank, she used the tin dipper slow and careful, like someone raised to mind her manners even when her life had fallen apart. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ida Jameson," she said. "I'm from Kansas." "What brings you to nowhere?" She met his eyes. "I walked here." "You what?" "I walked. Took me near 3 weeks. I'm not looking for charity, just a place to rest a night or two. Then I'll go." He rubbed his jaw. "You're serious?" "Yes." "Well, you can sleep in the barn, mind the horses, and don't touch what isn't yours." "I'm not helpless." "No," he muttered, turning away. "You're something else." He almost laughed at himself for it, but he didn't. The next morning, he expected her gone. Most folks with no food and a thin coat didn't stay long. But she was still there, sweeping the barn. The morning after that, she was feeding chickens. The day after, she fixed a broken hinge on the chicken coop without being asked. "You know this ain't your land," he said on the 4th day. "I know." "You planning to stay?" Quote, "I have nowhere else." Quote, "You said you'd move on." "I lied." He blinked. She didn't smile. She didn't apologize. That night she ate dinner at his table. Beans, salt pork, cornbread. She sat straight-backed, quiet but not shy. Her hands were clean, and she thanked him with a small nod. "You got family out here?" he asked. "No." "Husband?" "No." "You running from something?" "My stepfather sold everything after my mother died," she said. "Took the money and left me and my brother behind. We had nothing." "How old was your brother?" Quote, "9." Quentin stopped chewing. "I buried him behind the schoolhouse," she said. "The sheriff said fever. I think it was hunger." The lamp flickered between them. Quentin lowered his gaze. She wasn't telling him to feel sorry. She was simply telling the truth. A week passed, then 2. Ida didn't slow. She worked from sunrise to sunset without complaint. She patched roofs, dug fence posts, and shot the Winchester steady as any ranch hand. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't try to charm him. She was simply there, and strong. And she looked at him different than other folks. She didn't see a paycheck or a threat. She saw a man. Just a man. So he talked, more than he meant to, about the war, about writing dispatch, about the land he bought with his last army pay, about his brother who died in a mining collapse. Sometimes she listened. Sometimes she told her own stories, of creeks in Kansas, of sneaking food for Oliver, of her mother singing over laundry lines. One day he found her on her knees, scrubbing the cabin floor. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." He crouched beside her. "You really not planning to leave?" She looked up, cheeks flushed from work. "Do you want me to?" He hesitated. "First day I saw you, I figured you were a joke. Either crazy or desperate." "I was both," she said. "But you let me stay." "You stayed," he said softly. "I did." Something pulled inside his chest, tight and unfamiliar. "You're not a joke," he whispered. "I know that too," she said. That night a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked like cannon fire. Ida stood by the window, arms folded. "I don't like storms," she said. He stepped closer and held out his hand. Then come sit by the fire. She looked at his hand like she wasn't sure she deserved it. Then she placed hers in his and followed. They sat close, knees touching, her fingers curled around his. Her breathing softened. Her head rested on his shoulder like it belonged there. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "I know." She looked up at him. Rain hammered the roof. Firelight warmed her face. Then she kissed him, soft and steady, like she had decided something. When she pulled back, her eyes didn't waver. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Neither are you." He kissed her again, slower, deeper, and when she settled against him afterward, curled in his arms by the fire, he knew one thing with sudden clarity. She wasn't leaving. And he didn't want her to. How long does it take for a stranger to start feeling like home? That question stayed in Quentin's mind as winter settled deep over the valley. Snow climbed the fence posts. Ice formed in the creek. And every morning, Etta was there, steady, quiet, working like she belonged. She kept rising before him, lighting the stove, tending the horses, mending whatever needed mending. She didn't hover or ask for praise. She simply stayed close, a presence he felt, even when she wasn't in the room. One morning, he found her standing at the edge of the paddock before sunrise. Her breath rose in a white cloud as she stared east toward the ridgeline. "You expecting trouble?" he asked. She didn't turn. "I keep looking out of habit. Back home, trouble always came from the east." He walked toward her, boots crunching frost-bitten grass. "You waiting for someone?" "No," she said. "Just trying to figure out if I belong here." "You've been here near a month," he said. "That still feel like passing through?" She turned then. Her face was calm, but there was something softer in her eyes. "I don't know what it feels like yet." He nodded once. "Well, the cattle don't much care. They still need moving." They worked side by side, riding down the slope to push the herd toward the lower pasture. She handled her gelding with a sure hand, steady as the land itself. She didn't need orders. She didn't ask for help. She simply saw what needed doing. Quentin found himself watching her more than the cattle. When they reached the creek, she climbed down and started breaking ice on the bank. "You ever think about teaching?" he asked. "Teaching what?" she said. "Horses, ranch hands, me." She gave a small shrug. "I don't know how to teach. I just do." He swung down from his saddle. Doing is half the job. Later that evening, she lifted her saddle off her horse and winced. "You hurt?" he asked. "Not hurt," she said. "Just tired in places I didn't know I had." "You don't have to ride every day." She looked up at him with that steady stare of hers. "I want to." He stepped closer to hang the bridle, their shoulders brushing. She didn't move away. He didn't pretend not to notice. That night, she sat by the fire mending one of his shirts. Her stitches were small and clean. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. She didn't look up. "I try not to." "Why not?" Quote, "Because it hurts less when things don't happen." He leaned forward. "What if something good's waiting this time?" She set the shirt down and met his gaze. "Then I wouldn't know what to do with it." "You don't have to know," he said. The next morning, he found her in the root cellar counting potatoes and onions. She kept a small ledger page where she marked each item. "You planning to stay through winter?" he asked. "I was hoping you'd ask me to." "I'm asking." She gave a small nod. "Then I'll stay." Neither spoke more. A few days later, they rode into town together. Ida sat straight in her borrowed coat, quiet as always, taking in the snowy land like she meant to remember it. At the mercantile, she bought muslin, buttons, and a bar of soap, paid with coins she earned fixing a neighbor's fence. "You didn't need to buy for the house," Quentin said. "I didn't," she answered. "I bought for me, and what's mine stays where I'm welcome." He swallowed hard. "You're welcome." On the ride back, she leaned into him as snow flurried across the road. He tightened his arm around her and didn't say a word. By early November, the cold settled deep. Ida rose before dawn, stitching wool by lantern light. She was making new mittens for him, though she never said why. One morning he asked, "You ever do anything just for yourself?" "I like keeping my hands busy." "That's not what I asked." She paused. "I don't know what I'd do if nobody needed me." He stepped toward her. "You ever think maybe being wanted is better than being needed?" She held his gaze. "That's not something I ever learned to expect." "Well," he said softly, "you should." That afternoon he took her to a stretch of land he'd always meant to fence. "If we cleared this brush come spring, we could make another grazing section," he said. "We could?" she asked. "I was thinking we'd do it together, as something that's ours." She looked out over the open space. "I've never had land." "You've got hands that know how to hold it," he said. Ada didn't answer. She didn't have to. The way she looked at him was enough. That night she sat by the fire holding the finished mittens. She turned them over in her hands, thinking long and quiet. In the morning she handed them to him without a word. He slipped them on. "You made these to last." That was the point. A week later a letter came from Cheyenne. Etta found him on the porch mending a saddle strap. "It's from my cousin George," he said. "He wants to know if I'll buy his wheelwright shop." She froze. "You thinking of leaving?" "No," he said firmly. "Not now." She nodded, calm but watchful. That night, sitting together in the barn loft, he said, "Tell me something you were afraid to hope for." She took a long breath. "A home I didn't have to earn. A place where nobody waited for me to be useful before they let me stay." He took her hand gently. "You don't have to prove anything to me." She leaned into him, soft and certain. He kissed her slow, with care, and she answered like she'd been waiting for someone to treat her that way her whole life. From that night on, she stopped standing at the edge of the porch looking east. She stopped expecting to be sent away. She began to stay. What does a woman do when she finally stops running? Etta found out in the slow thaw of spring, when the ice broke in the creek and the ground softened beneath her boots. The world felt new, but not because of the weather. It felt new because she was no longer passing through. She was choosing to stay. Quentin was out at the far field one morning marking a fence line when she stepped onto the porch, arms folded, watching him work. He didn't wave, didn't call to her. He just kept setting rope markers like a man, planning a future he hoped she'd be part of. When he came in for supper, she handed him a plate of cornbread and boiled cabbage. No fuss, no words, just the quiet rhythm they had learned together. They ate side by side until he leaned back and said, "I saw a sheltered draw near the southern boundary. Place looks good for a house." She looked up. "For livestock?" He shook his head. "For living, for us. This cabin was meant for one man. I want to build something that suits two." Quote. Ida set down her spoon and moved to kneel beside his chair. Her voice was soft but steady. "If we build new, I want a window facing east. I want to see the sun first." He smiled, slow and warm. "Then we'll put it there." The next day, they borrowed a wagon and hauled timber from the mill. On the ride back, the sky gold at the edges, Quentin noticed Etta's hand resting low against her belly. She'd been quiet all afternoon. "Something on your mind?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "I've been keeping something, didn't want to say it until I was sure." He pulled the reins, slowing the wagon. "I think I'm carrying," she said. He blinked, breath catching. You're sure?" Quote. She nodded. "Maybe 2 months. I'm not afraid this time. I'm not alone." He reached for her hand and kissed her knuckles. "You'll never be alone again." They didn't speak the rest of the way, but when he helped her down from the wagon, his hand stayed at the small of her back, gentle and steady. That night, he lay awake long after she slept, her head tucked beneath his chin. He thought of what it meant to be a father, something he'd never seen done right. But he had her now, and she had him. That felt like enough. By mid-April, the new house took shape. Beams stood tall. The roof waited for shingles. When frost finally left the ground, Etta planted calendula near the door and hung a strip of cedar above the lintel. Quentin carved their initials into the new frame, low where only they would notice. Their wedding was simple. She wore a wool dress she dyed with walnut and stitched herself. He wore his cleanest shirt and borrowed a color pin. The preacher from 10 Sleep came with a Bible and a quiet smile. No speeches, no crowd. Just two people who had already chosen each other long before the vows were spoken. When the preacher said husband and wife, Quentin kissed her like he had always belonged to her, and she to him. Later, as they stood on the porch of the new house, watching the wind move through the grass, Ida pressed a hand to her belly. "I want to name her Ruth," she said. "You think it's a girl?" "I feel it." "Ruth it is." Quote, "Spring bloomed slow. They planted turnips and beans. They built a coop for the new hens." Ida laughed more often now, a sound warm as sunlight. Quentin softened too, moving careful around her, around the future they were building. When the baby came after the first summer storm, she was small and perfect, with Ida's eyes and Quentin's hands. They named her Ruth, like they promised. They raised her in the house they built together, on land neither of them had come from, but both had chosen. Every morning, Ida opened the east window first, letting the sunlight spill across the floor like a blessing she once believed she'd never earn. The woman who once stood at his fence asking only for water now lay warm beside him each night, her head on his shoulder, a soft reminder of the day he stopped laughing at her and started loving her instead. And Quentin Granger never once wished she had kept walking.